Today is Veli Ngubane. He's the managing director of the Avatar Group. So, Veli, first of all, welcome to the Marketing Wars feature on the Ashraf Garda show.
Thank you. Great feature, much needed in our industry. Thank you, Ashraf.
Thank you. And of course, I suppose what's much needed for you is this ongoing problem around transformation in your industry. So, perhaps let's just take a step back. You've written something. There's been lots of discussion. I would think prompted, in fact, by hashtag Black Lives Matter and the goings on, in particular in the USA, just over a week ago. So first, give me some context. Why the concern, and then we'll talk about South Africa and your marketing space specifically.
Okay, and I think that's a vital place to start. I think it's something that I've been actively involved in, from the board positions that I sit to the IEB Transformation Council head, and just a way to make sure that more Black participants are participating in the industry. Now, it's something that a lot of people have been talking about for a long time. And my conversation about it, especially this week, is to look at it a bit more differently. Is to say, over the years, why haven't we achieved it? What is wrong with the conversation? And I got thinking, and some of the issues, it's because transformation has been framed as a political issue where it's actually an economic issue. You know, it's about the economy more than it is about politics, although related, but acutely about economic transformation more than political transformation.
All right, let me stop you there and understand that. Why would transformation in South Africa be more about economics than about politics?
So the American condition is very different to our South African context. And that's why when people compare it, as much as it's related, it's not the same. There's a few factors that are different. In Black Lives Matter in America is very different to Black Lives Mattering in South Africa for two reasons. One, Black people in America are the minority. In South Africa, we are the majority. That's the first big reason, right? Now, we have political power as the majority, and Americans do not have political power. So their struggle is really about rights. So they are still on the struggle that we overcome in 1994. So it's totally different. Their struggle is very different. So ours was achieved in 1994. We achieved political freedom, but we haven't achieved economic freedom. So although comparable in terms of the rights, but when we talk about Black Lives Mattering, it's a very different context in the American context than it is in the South African context, because we have achieved our political freedom. What we haven't achieved is our economic freedom. And that's why I say transformation, therefore, is about economic transformation of the people that were previously oppressed politically.
Okay, so let's then zone in specifically in your advertising and marketing space, in your industry, right? So do you have economic freedom in the marketing space?
Not yet. I think it's exactly what we are talking about here. It's about having and gaining more people of color in executive position, in decision-making positions, in the agencies that previously were occupied by Black people. So that's the start of it. That's the start of transformation. The second layer of it is getting more entrepreneurs and participants, so more Black-owned agencies involved in it. So we are very, very far from it in our industry. And again, it's because it's been positioned as a black and white issue. And it actually isn't. It goes to what is right about growing the industry. And again, because it's been framed as Black people replacing white people, which it's not. What it is Black people and people of diversity and women coming into a system and making it better and making it grow. And I think what Black Lives have highlighted And that's where the conversation is that our agency world is not equipped to deal with race issues. You've seen the silence from brands, you've seen the silence from agencies, and that is an issue of diversity. They don't have people that are diverse enough in the room to have an opinion. We've seen brands blunder, not because it's a black and white issue, because it's a diversity issue of people resisting transformation, therefore not having the insight to be able to communicate on issues of race, and not having the moral license to communicate on issues of race. Okay. So once we start seeing it as a nation against racial oppression, against racial exclusion, then we start to elevate the argument beyond just black people replacing white people in positions, because that's where it's kind of been. And I believe that has been the biggest problem in its resistance.
Right. You've said lots of things. Let's start with the numbers. When we talk about, transforming your industry, I mean, what are the numbers? That means, how many people are in the industry? How many black-owned agencies? How many black South Africans are in leadership positions versus South Africans who are not black, who are white in leadership positions? I mean, give me some indication of where we're at.
So what I've done with the IAB Council, we are partnering with an academic institution to do research on the past 26 years of transformation. Another problem is exactly what you're talking about. Who is measuring? What are the reports on it? And what is the goals that we have as an industry to reach? And before we actually get there, we've got no scientific data to actually evaluate whether we are doing well or not. It's people's opinions, and those opinions are right because we see it. We see it in the boardrooms. We see it when clients award agencies. There are not enough black-owned agencies, and those agencies you can basically count with your hand. They're really sizable ones. So we need more sizable agencies that can compete for a bigger part of the business. So it starts there. It starts with a measured approach, because before you achieve something, you have to be able to have a benchmark of, in the last 26 years, this is what has happened. These are the types of BE transactions that have happened. These are the types of leadership positions. And then we can start to evaluate. And another thing that has been problematic with empowerment is that we've always wanted to look back, like pre-apartheid. It's been a science of looking back when it actually should be a science of looking into the future, because the generations that come shouldn't inherit that. And once we have an academic study that really points out and points the way to say what has worked in transformation, what hasn't worked in transformation, then we've got a game plan. Then we can start handing over those measurements and matrix to the next generation so they can evaluate whether we actually have enough or are we actually progressing? And then we have measurement. Okay. So now, that's the question.
You see the numbers you speak about, the IAB, perhaps you can just tell us who that is and whether, if you're saying that there's no research on the numbers, I'm not too sure whether that's true. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Did not Odette Roper and company get involved in a MAC charter, but this is a good few years ago, and maybe I've got some of the terminology wrong, to determine just that, to push together the process of transformation. So my point is, like, are we saying, A, that there is no research available that has been put together by the mother body looking at marketing and advertising in the country? And if the answer is no, then why would that be no up to now? That's quite incredible, because I would have thought that there has to be some research done long before, and there has to have been some definite attempts to transform. And I've had many chats about this when I hosted the media show on SAFM before.
Definitely. There is research out there, but what I'm saying is that it needs to be monitored research. Research is one thing being done 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but until it's accepted research on a collective view of the entire industry, bodies that have conducted different types of research, that we need a collective game plan led by research. Because research is one thing. Research will tell you there's not enough black females in leadership positions. Research will tell you that there's not enough people of color, which is good. But what we haven't gotten to is, and then what? And then how do we fix that? Because we'll be in this tailspin of knowing the obvious. We see the industry, we are in the industry, we are aware that there's not enough black participation. We are aware that there's not enough black-owned agencies. But what do we do? How do we use research and data to make sure that we pan out a future plan to say, by 2023, this is the milestone that we as an industry, irregardless of the industry body, this is where we need to go. So for me, research is one thing, and research is important. But there's a next step after research to say, okay, we know what the research is. What is the game plan using that research to make a plan? You know, even for brands, on a brand level, what is your diversity plan? What is your transformation plan? And what are your milestones? And are you reaching those milestones? So that's really it. So to answer your question, research is widely available. Research has been done. Academic research has been done. But what I haven't seen is the research leading to a plan with milestones that are measurable across the industry. And that's what we really
So
need.
if you're saying that is an issue of serious concern, because I'm thinking, and maybe you can help us with this here. So who is the mother body that should be driving this plan based upon the research that you've alluded to? And if the mother body is not doing so, then what are the agencies that belong to the mother body, including, let's say, yours, Avatar? What are you doing to ensure that the mother body does just that?
That's exactly the conversation that we are having with these bodies. It's a conversation that doesn't rest with just one body. I think it's a collective conversation with the different bodies and the different interest groups. Again, the biggest enemy of transformation is the division and not having one common voice to what we want to achieve. And therein lies some of the problems. You know, so we need to make sure that all these bodies that represent agencies in different levels collaborate in order to have a game plan about where this industry is going in terms of transformation. So it's that disunity that becomes the enemy of transformation, because we do not have a coordinated plan and an agreement of the milestones that we need to achieve as the agency. And because historically it's been positioned as equality versus equity. Transformation is more about equity than it is about equality, because equality would suggest that black people that start agencies want to be equal to white-owned agencies, which is not the case. What we want and what we need in the industry to transform is an equitable share that is reflecting the demographics of this country. Now, a lot of people get emotional about it, but it's actually quite factual. You've got a country and you've got an industry that is servicing a consumer that is predominantly black, and the agencies and the people that are servicing with the insight to service those people surely need to be black. So it's really about that, Ashraf. So it's about unity.
So I mean,
and it's about the agency.
Okay, yeah. I would think, I mean, this is going to require a follow-up discussion with other parties involved, absolutely, and maybe even predominantly white-owned agencies, right? But let me understand this for clarity, right? We understand the why. I think the why is an easy sell. We understand why. And I think the how is where we're sitting with the problem, right? Are you saying that in your advertising, marketing space across the board, there is no charter where the agencies have been asked to agree and therefore sign up to a commitment to transform their industries by transforming their agencies, let's say, in the last 5 years? Are you saying there's nothing like that?
So I'm saying that it's not a united effort. There is that. There is the MAC Charter. There is transformation laws. There is all these things that we have. But what I'm saying is that it's not a united effort to get to the goals that we all collectively want, as all the different agency owners, as all the different entities that are wanting this industry to grow in a vision. That is the problem. Mine is saying is that there's agreements and different people are going totally different directions when they should be united to say this is where we want to take the industry. Is that it needs a coordinated way of making sure that in the industry, irregardless of what associations we belong to, have got a common goal to go. But not even that. We need to be able to measure that what we've agreed on is what is happening and the milestones to that.
Are these agreements, are they voluntary agreements? That means, let's take your agency Avatar. If you choose to sign up and you follow through. And if you choose not to, you don't sign up and you don't follow through, or you sign up and you don't follow through anyway. I mean, help us understand that.
So there should be consequences. It's voluntary. As an agency owner, I can choose which organization I need to belong to. So it's voluntary. So what I'm saying is that our conversation now must go even beyond that. It must go beyond what your agency is part of, because what we are trying to do is for the greater good of transformation. What we are saying is that transformation is not happening. We need to research and find out what has happened for transformation not to happen. It's like a CODESA. We all need to come as agencies, whether it's a conference, whether it's a symposium. We need to all come back, sit down, and say, us have not achieved what we want to see in terms of the industry reflected. And when we say we commonly agree, that's the point, right? We have the research to back it up, and we say, okay, for the next 10 years, what do we all want to collectively see in the industry, and what the history is the important thing, regardless of who you are part of us. The problem is, if we do not have that unity, if we do not have, our industry will not grow to its full potential, because it won't reach the type of diversity that it needs to serve a consumer.
Okay, you're talking about that economic imperative. Let's just go back to the numbers, because I just need clarity on this. And I'm not saying you need to be exactly specific on this thing here, but approximately what percentage of agencies in the country are black-owned, number one? Approximately what percentage of agencies have black people on board? That means what percentage of black people are on boards of agencies, and approximately what percentage of people in the broader advertising marketing space are employed in that space who are black? I mean, just give us rough percentages, because it helps me then get a picture of what we're talking about here.
So there's also a very different way of thinking, which goes beyond the numbers. And addition should be, is that okay? The black participants that are in the industry, they have enough franchise and power to effect change in those organizations. Because I think our history, yes, I've got 3 board members here, but are they empowered enough to make the change? Right? So it starts there. It starts with re-looking and not just chasing the numbers per se, to say, this MD that we have here, this creative head that we have here, are they empowered enough to really affect change in the organization, or are they just there because they are black? So that is a conversation that we need to have. Right, and then secondly, the research will be able to tell the real specifics of that. But it's about having people of color in empowered decisions to make fundamental changes in those organizations and have the franchise to do that, that goes beyond just chasing the numbers to say, oh, we've got 50% of our board that is black, we've got 25% that is female. That is good. But we need to go even a level deeper to say, are those people empowered in those agencies? Are those people empowered in that brand space to make the decisions to actually effect change? And that is what
I take it then. I mean, you don't need me to set up this meeting. I mean, I would take it even long beyond this chat here, that you and your colleagues in the industry, black and white, would be having your own sort of talks before talks to set it up, isn't it?
Definitely. So we're planning to talk, and I think what Black Lives Matter in a South African context has catalyzed is the urgent need for insight. It's the urgent need to make sure that our agencies are transformed enough to deal with racial issues. Now, that is a very important thing that is now a business imperative. So what we are saying is that beyond the scorecard, beyond the necessary legal requirement, our product as marketers, our product as advertisers is starting to suffer because we do not have enough diversity in the people that make the work. We do not have enough powerful people in the industry, and we do not have enough black-owned agencies. And I usually don't like this when there's about 4 or 5 agencies that are black-owned and they're doing well. That's not enough. We need to make sure that we've got more agencies, and we are setting up this dialogue. And for me, it's not a dialogue of race. It's not a dialogue against black and white. It's dialogue of growing the industry because diversity has been proven to be good for creativity. Diversity has been proven to be good for the economy because then you've got different thoughts.
When is this dialogue likely to happen? I mean, give us some timelines.
I'm thinking this year. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of planning, but it will definitely happen this year. And I want it to be a Codesa style where we leave our differences, and it's not about race, but it's for the future of the industry. It's a dialogue that must happen very soon because it's something that is much needed. And what Black Lives Matters and the silence from both agencies and brands around the topic, it's showing that people don't know how to deal with it. Now, that creates tension. That already is playing out on social media when people are making these mistakes publicly. Now, conference that we need to have, this gathering that we need to have, saves our businesses because it says we need to have more people that are diverse around the table so that we can protect ourselves against things that we don't understand. And it's about removing the fear. Black people want to replace white people. That is not the case. The case is the more we collaborate, the case is the more we work together, the case is the more agencies of color are getting a slice of the pie, it's going to reflect in the work. And because ours is to connect with the consumer, we will start connecting with the consumer more. And basically our skill, even by client, will be taken more seriously because it will be more effective.
Okay. Because here's a question to end with, right? Would Avatar as an agency, would you or do you, in fact, only take on work if you agree with the general ethos of the brands that you represent?
We take on work if we agree with the direction of where the brand is going. We previously took on H&M.
I'm aware of it.
When they were in crisis, right? Now, ours as brand practitioners is to evaluate how do you want your future to look. So it's not to look at the brand in its current state or in its current needs of the mistakes that it's had. You say, okay, here's H&M. There's been a racially linked problem. we've got the skills to make sure that we help you out of that. If you see a future that is different to your reality, we are there to help. So for me, when we take on brands and when we win brands and when we pitch on brands, for me, it's more about what the future plan is more than what the past or the present is. Because ours is reform, ours is to change. And similarly to even the white-owned agencies that are struggling with transformation, it's not to point fingers and say, hey, so-and-so is not doing this. It's to help conscientize what the problem is. And also come and offer a solution to say, this is what you need to do, because maybe you're struggling. Maybe it's not that you don't want to transform. Maybe you're just struggling with understanding how to, right? Now, we need to be there as Black agency owners to show you the value of diversity, one, because we live it, and two, to show you how much better your product is to client, how good it is for your business. And even beyond that, how good it is for the country, because the amount of creativity that we have just lying in the township, in the rural areas, is incredible. And it can make those brands. We are positioned to take brands that see a future that is diverse, a future that is transformed, and brands that want to make a difference in the future of this country, because that is really who we want to be in this brand space.
Okay, let's leave it with this. I mean, agencies effectively represent brands in providing the type of creativity needed for the brands to communicate to the consumers, right? Do you find, therefore, that by and large, and you gave the H&M example, I mean, you guys took on the job after they were trashed in South Africa around, I think, those monkey T-shirts, if I'm not mistaken, right? But do you find, by and large, brands are tone deaf, and therefore agencies have a responsibility not only to produce or provide creativity, but also to provide a level of consciousness that the brands can then embrace when they communicate with their customer?
Definitely. That is part and parcel of the need of the communication. You need to understand the tone of your market. You need to understand the mood of your market, because therein lies the strategic way to connect with them. So the brands that are tone deaf will carry on making those mistakes, not necessarily because they're racist, but because they're not diverse enough to actually understand the other side, right? And equally, for us, is to make sure that we understand the context of the people in which we are marketing to. So for me, again, I emphasize that it's not about race, it's not about black and white, it is about us understanding what we want for the future of this industry and adding enough diversity in our teams to cater for a very, very diverse country. Now that is very, very important.
Okay.
And that will take the future of our industry.
Let's leave it at that. Maybe hashtag the struggle continues. Veli Ngubane from the Avatar Agency, thank you for your time and joining me on Marketing Wars. Needless to say that I certainly would need to get another side or sides of opinions in terms of where South Africa is in the marketing space and transformation and what more needs to be happening. So there we are. Thank you for your time. With me is Arthur Goldstuck, is the MD of Worldwide Works. Arthur, welcome to what we call Marketing Wars here on the Ashraf Garda Show.
Thank you, Ashraf. Good to be chatting with you.
Thank you. Now, are we talking specifically in the context of what the social media landscape 2020 report or presentation that was delivered a few days ago? I understand a combination put together by Ornico on the one hand and your company Worldwide Works. So that's why we're talking. Firstly, how important is this report? I mean, in terms of the reasons why this report is important, why is it important?
It's important because social media has become the new media, in effect, especially with print media being under such heavy pressure and not being able to cover as much as it could in the past and not being as available as it has been in the past. The traditional media as well as emerging media are turning to social platforms to share news and information. But along with that, these platforms have given the ordinary individual a platform, a voice, and a channel So it's not only receiving news, but it's also participating in news, responding to news, and sharing their own information. But not just from a news point of view, also from a social point of view. These platforms have become most South Africans' first port of call when they want to express themselves or communicate with anyone else. Aside from direct one-to-one communication on instant messaging or by phone, for example, social media has become everyone's default communications platform. So it's important to understand what the trends are shaping it, what are the emerging platforms, how they are being used, and in particular by brands, we want to see the extent to which they are leveraging social platforms and which are working for them, which aren't, and why they're not working. That is probably a critical question, how to make these platforms work for you.
Absolutely.
And that applies to brands and consumers.
And the reporting, I mean, I've had a periscope view of it, and it's fascinating, the numbers, but I mean, there's so much to come through, right? But here's the question. Is the report directed to the social media user, which are many in the world, as you've just mentioned, or is it in fact skewed for the understanding of marketers and brand managers?
It's very much a marketer's report. It's intended to give marketers the market intelligence they need to use social media effectively in South Africa. So their strategies will dictate how they practically and actively use it, but this kind of data and the insights in this report will provide them with the background and the data they need to justify how they use the platform.
Okay, great. So I'm probably going to run through, various social media platforms in a moment, but before we do that, perhaps your thoughts on the general overview of what was presented.
I think the most interesting thing that we saw was the extent to which Facebook has remained the default platform for most marketers and for most consumers, for that matter. So when we asked people in the biggest brands in South Africa, which platform do you use? 9 out of 10 said Facebook. Next highest was, so that was 89% to be exact. Next highest was Twitter at 77.5%, so well behind Facebook. Then came, interestingly enough, LinkedIn at 75%, just behind Twitter, and catching up very fast. LinkedIn's growth has been much more rapid than Twitter in the past year. The previous year, LinkedIn was on 73%, went up to 75%. Twitter had been on 83% and dropped to 77%. And then when we look at what they are going to do next, we see LinkedIn with 21% of brands saying that they plan to use it if they hadn't used it before. And that tells you that LinkedIn is going to shoot past Twitter in the coming year as a go-to platform for brands. Instagram, not far behind, on 68%, but they've also come down from 77%. And LinkedIn has overtaken Instagram, which is quite astonishing when you consider how Instagram gets all the media mileage, and LinkedIn is seen as the serious platform. And then YouTube, quite far behind those. Only half of brands are using YouTube, literally 50%, dramatically down from well over 60%. But then when we ask what they're going to be using next, there was a very interesting name that cropped up that doesn't really appear at the moment, and that was TikTok. So last year, TikTok was used by about 20% of brands, so it didn't even appear on the radar of the most used brands in South Africa, or the most used platforms in South Africa. But in the coming year, an additional 31% intend to use it, and my suspicion is that once other brands become aware of just how powerful the platform is, even more will use it. Powerful in particular amongst the youth. So any brand that wants to target the youth is going to have to take to TikTok.
And just so that I understand the analysis correctly, this is a survey that was done and therefore responded to by custodians in this marketing and branding space, right? So you're asking them, A, whether they were using these platforms, and B, whether they were using it not just for personal use, but using it on behalf of brands that they represent. Have I got that right? I mean, this is not a survey of the general public, right?
That's correct, but the report does have several parts to it. The main part is our primary survey amongst the biggest brands in South Africa. More than 100 brands took part in the survey. And then in addition to that, we then analyzed each of the individual platforms' user numbers. And we also work with a few what they call social listening platforms to get their data. And we also collaborate with Ask Africa, who does the annual TGI survey of consumers, to get that consumer data. So there's a vast depths of consumer insights and data in the report, but the primary research in terms of the main findings were around how brands themselves are using social media in South Africa.
Let's then do some deep diving into some of the specifics then. So let's start with the TikTok, because you mentioned just how they're rising. And just for the record, no, I will not be attempting any dance sequence to one of your popular songs, so leave that out. What's the big appeal for TikTok, Arthur, in spite of my own concerns about it?
I think the initial big appeal was the whole idea that it's a network or a platform of your peers, and particularly for teenagers. And the fact that they could make videos so easily and upload them so easily made it very instant for them in terms of instant gratification. So call it the instantaneous platform, if you like, but you can do anything you like on it. Also, it's very undemanding. The videos last from 12 seconds to 60 seconds. So you don't have to sit and do a professional production of a 3-minute to 30-minute YouTube video, for example, where the pressure is really on. Yeah, it's very casual. And also, there is a tremendous appetite for this kind of content amongst the youth. The next really big appeal of it is that the youth find themselves with new role models and new stars that are only their stars and only their role models. They don't belong to the mainstream media. So when you look at characters, for example, like Shanae and Whitney H, who are two of the most popular South Africans on TikTok, they're utterly unknown outside of the TikTok world. They belong to TikTok, and therefore the TikTok users feel these are our stars. They're not stars that we've borrowed from mainstream media or from the hype of the media machine out there. This is inside. This is our little world. And these are our stars in our world.
And therefore, so here's the thing. The appeal of TikTok then, from a user point, is one thing. So the appeal then to brands, what would the appeal then be? What's in it for the brands?
Brands haven't quite worked it out yet. But one of my favorite case studies is Starbucks, which has been launching their new drinks in collaboration with the TikTok stars. And the way they do that is to invite the TikTok characters to their events. And I think initially it's all unpaid. It's just, we would like to host you, free drinks, good party, meet up with your TikTok friends, etc. And that alone created massive hype around their involvement on TikTok. I think as it moves on, brands like that will have to pay these TikTok influencers, let's call them, to attend their events and to also post on TikTok about the events. But the obvious thing that happens is that you have tremendous sharing of images, videos, and the like from those events on TikTok, and therefore that amplifies the brand presence on TikTok quite dramatically, far beyond.
And I take it, you're not going to get a breaking news story on TikTok. You're not going to have discussions around COVID-19. Meaning, it's fun. It's the type of escapism that people would love to yearn for on a weekend in normal times, isn't it?
Yes and no. In fact, TikTok is a massive channel for COVID-19 coverage. So when the crisis first began and when lockdown was about to start, pre-lockdown even, just in the social distancing period, you already had massive efforts by the stars and ordinary people of TikTok sharing videos about how to behave, what to do, etc. The first washing hands videos that I saw were actually on TikTok. And then TikTok has also been carrying breaking news from news channels as well. My own TikTok channel was created, in fact, to interview interesting people on TikTok in less than 60 seconds. And one of those was, in fact, two of them were the TikTok personalities I mentioned, Shanae and Whitney 8. And I was astonished to see the traction that those videos got. I think the interview with Shanae got more than 60,000 views, and with Whitney 8's more than 90,000 views. I actually check what the latest figures are. They keep going up. But I've never had such engagement and such viewership of content I've created and put online in any other platform. And this was early days for me. It was in the first few weeks.
Okay, we know to find you now, TikTok away, right? Let's then get the clock ticking to. Let's get to the old warhorse in this case, Facebook, and your point about how it appears to have longevity in spite of what others may think. So what are the insights that you can share from that?
So there are quite a few. The one key insight is that the social media brand decision makers, in other words, the marketers in the large organizations and with large brands, tend to stick with the platforms that they know. And that's why you see Facebook still remaining so popular and TikTok still, being so small at the moment. And when I say platforms they know, not just that they know how the platforms work, but that they actively use those platforms. And we tend to find that marketers don't use Twitter as actively as they use Facebook, because Facebook is in their personal lives. LinkedIn reflects their professional lives. They're all trying to make contacts on LinkedIn, probably to remain employable as well in the long term. Whereas Twitter, for many of them, is a threatening environment. And I think that's why they've pulled back from Twitter. Where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, is when you look at where they are spending most of their social media budget. And we asked that question in terms of which is your most important platform for allocating social media budget. And Facebook was way ahead of everyone else. 59%, close to 60% of respondents said that Facebook was their primary outlet for social media budget. And guess which one came second, Ashraf?
I'm going to now suggest, no, I was going to say LinkedIn, but I don't see much of that. Well, you tell me. You know, I would have thought Instagram, because it was fast rising in the last couple of years, but things may have changed.
It's changed ever so slightly. In fact, it was LinkedIn.
So it has been,
but
yeah.
so far behind. 15% of respondents said LinkedIn, and then came Instagram with 11% of respondents. So they actually changed positions. Last year, Instagram was second, and then LinkedIn. And Twitter remains unpopular as a primary source of spending market budgets, only 5%. And that was down from 8% last year. And the rest were negligible in terms of being a primary platform. So those are the three main ones, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. But watch LinkedIn. It's getting more and more traction. I think also as the content on LinkedIn becomes more compellable and more shareable and more, call it, reactable, because now there's a range of reactions that you can give a LinkedIn post. I think you'll see LinkedIn rising even more rapidly.
I think just from a personal point with myself and LinkedIn, I mean, there was a period when I hardly used it. It was just there. It's like showcasing if you're looking for a job. But I personally see it now as an active brand building exercise, personal brand building, and for my podcast and YouTube. So yeah, I think if others are thinking the way I'm thinking, then they're probably going to use LinkedIn and take it a lot more seriously. But let's just stay with the LinkedIn one. What I don't see, because what you're telling me is 15% of the spend is going to LinkedIn. Now why would marketers want to spend money there? To target who? Because if the masses are playing in Facebook, and I would still assume the Instagram space, I don't hear people talk about LinkedIn the way they talk about Instagram.
I'll give you an example from my own experience. I'm doing a series of webinars with a niche bank called Sasfin, and they are using both LinkedIn and Twitter to market the webinars. And they get good response on Twitter, which surprised me. I expected far less of a response because of the serious brand that they represent. But LinkedIn is where they get all their action, massive amounts of sharing, liking, and the like, both before the event, during the event, and then afterwards as well, people responding to it. That has been their most successful marketing environment. So you can see why brands like that would prefer to use LinkedIn to any of the other platforms.
Okay, and just stay with the Facebook point of view. Okay, your numbers are there. I understand that, but there was a period where the sense that Facebook's getting too old, right? So younger people are going to Instagram, and now you bring up TikTok. So why do you think Facebook has been able to retain that massive audience in spite of the naysayers before?
There's a few reasons. The naysayers tend to look only at a snapshot of what's happening right now. And we find that, generally speaking, with analysts, in a very similar way to which stock market analysts or currency analysts will look at what happened in the last 24 hours, and they'll extrapolate that to being the long-term picture. So if you look at the stock market, for example, in the USA, where it's, I think NASDAQ just reached its highest ever point. Just before the COVID-19 crash, when it crashed quite far, it was on its way to that highest point. When it crashed, it looked like a dramatic crash, and all the analysts analyzed it from that point of view. But if they took it on a 12-month basis, it was still significantly higher than it had been 12 months before. So that would have told them that in the long term, this wasn't truly a crash in terms of a long-term trend line. And you find the same thing with Facebook. They look at happening right now was that the proportion of teenagers joining Facebook under 18s was falling significantly. And the proportion of the overall Facebook user base made up by the under 18s was also dropping dramatically. But in the overall, Facebook as a whole was still growing. But these observers were not actually looking at the bigger picture and the longer term picture. They were just looking at that little niche area, or that little slice, that little snapshot of Facebook's activity, and saying this is the end for Facebook, which was clearly absurd. We called it out last year as well when those kind of comments were being made. Facebook is still by far the biggest social platform in the world and still growing. So despite all its debacles, despite all its public relations disasters and blunders, it continues to grow. And for that reason, it's still going to continue to be the one used the most by social media professionals at the big brands, and therefore they'll continue allocating budget to that platform.
Okay, let's touch on Instagram then. So I've said earlier on that my understanding was a couple of years ago it was just an incredibly fast riser for a fairly newish platform, right? But you telling me now that in fact that rise has not just slowed, but the usage has dropped off in South Africa. Give me those numbers again and tell me why.
It's not that usage has dropped off. It's that Instagram has been overtaken by LinkedIn as a primary source of spending marketing budget. When you look at the user numbers, they've grown dramatically. In fact, Instagram and Twitter are neck and neck, a total of around 9 million users on each platform, and each of them has around 4.7 million highly active users. That represents 19% of the South African living in cities and towns. That's massive, 1 in 5 using Instagram. And where you see the impact of that penetration is when we ask the brands where they are going to increase their spend on live streaming in terms of using social networks for live events, live video, and the like. And there Facebook still comes up number 1. 43% said yes. But what's number 2? Instagram, 29%. So specifically for live streaming, Instagram is the fast rising platform. The year before, Instagram was at 21%. Facebook was at 42%. So Facebook went up by 1%. Instagram went up by 8%. And that tells you then that Instagram is still very powerful for specific purposes. So IGTV, Instagram TV, has been a huge success story for Instagram.
And that live concept, I understand that during COVID-19, well, and I know it even now, just about everybody was like let's do a live chat. Why do you think, which is certainly not part of the normal Instagram plan, I would think, right? What is your understanding of why has it become that popular for live, whereas I don't think anybody besides organizations would say, let's have a live Twitter chat, for example, even news people?
I'm not aware of anyone who uses Twitter as their primary outlet for live broadcasting. So everyone is looking for the most effective platform for live events. And that's aside from the webinar platforms like Zoom and Teams. But in terms of marrying live streaming with social media, there's really only 3 games in town. That's Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. With YouTube, it's cheaper and you can get a much bigger audience, but it's a lot more difficult. It's complex. With Instagram, it's incredibly easy. And as I was saying about TikTok earlier, it's almost a case of just switching on your phone cam and you're live. And you don't get that sense with Facebook live events or YouTube live events where you feel you have to produce the event. A lot more production value has to go into those platforms. Whereas Instagram and TikTok are instant.
And I'm thinking about a shopping mall. One thing is people shop to shop, but they also shop to see who else is shopping there. And do I take it that Instagram in particular is like a celebrity shopping mall? So if you're on Instagram, you'll see all these celebrity shoppers walking past you.
That's a great way of describing it. And I think that's one of the appeals of a lot of these social platforms. Same applies to YouTube and Facebook is on the event as well. And you can actually banter with each other, which you can't do on Twitter, for instance. So the engagement on a Twitter event is very limited. All the others are looking for ways of enhancing engagement. So that's where Twitter still has a long way to go to catch up.
And with Instagram, you mentioned IGTV Live, and I certainly have used it, and I probably will use it even more so. But the other one is Instagram Stories, and then Facebook Stories, of course, owned by the same company. There was a sense about a year ago that I've heard that, in fact, Stories will take over even the main feed. I mean, did that come through in your survey?
No, not at all. I think Stories is too difficult to almost pin down, you could say. Stories have to be experienced live or as they happen, and that means that they don't have long-term traction, whereas all the other methods do have long-term traction, particularly if you're recording live events and making them available on an ongoing basis after the event is over. So that tends to beat the one-off live experience.
Okay, what do you pick up from YouTube?
YouTube is losing a lot of favor, and I think one of the reasons for that is that they keep changing the rules and they don't treat their creator community very well, and they don't respect the small creator, for example, and they have too much respect for the big creators. So they've been called out regularly on their blunders that they've made, and among other things, not being child-friendly or picking down when it's either too late or excessively when it's not necessary. That's one side of it. And then another side of it is allowing violent content or content that promotes violence, content that promotes misinformation, almost abuse. If you look at the kind of right-wing conspiracy theory-oriented sites that claim that events like Sandy Hook were fabricated and used crisis actors, which was incredibly harmful to the families of the victims. And yet, it took a long time for YouTube to actually act on that kind of content. It was actually disgraceful behavior on the part of YouTube, and I think it's come back to bite them in a way that Facebook tends to have survived, because Facebook is where people socialize as well. YouTube is purely where people consume information, aside from the creators themselves. So advertisers are associating their messages with whatever content is most popular on YouTube, and suddenly they find themselves, in effect, funding the abusers on YouTube. And I think that's been massive for YouTube. Unfortunately, their revenue, Google's revenue still keeps going up from advertising because they're the only game in town in certain respects. But YouTube certainly needs to clean up its act, both in terms of its content, which to some extent it has, but also the way it treats its small. Just as an example, if you're a creator on YouTube, you can't monetize your videos now unless you have 1,000. Getting a free long tail, the long tail being all the little players who don't appear on the radar as big providers of traffic. But when you add them all up, it's a massive proportion of YouTube traffic, and they're not having to pay a single cent for the traffic that they generate.
And the flip side of that, of course, talking about big players with Joe Rogan now moving on to Spotify alone, out of YouTube, that is another discussion that one would have to take a closer look at, right? Two things before I let you go, then, Arthur. The one is in terms of the results of the survey. Does it come through that people use multiple platforms? So an Arthur Goldstuck can be on Twitter, can be on Instagram, can be on LinkedIn, is on TikTok now that I know, and Facebook, and that reflects when people try and target you that you are using multiple platforms, or do they make the assumption that in fact your favorite platform is the only one they're interested in?
Now, you do find that there's massive cross-pollination. So if you look at the most popular Instagram personalities, for example, they include people like Boiti and Minnie Dlamini and Bonang Mateba and Casper Nieuwest and Pearl Tuzi, as well as A.B. de Villiers, the cricketer. And those also happen to be among the most popular on Twitter, for example. Also on any of the other platforms you like those trends is TikTok, which has its own stars. But the fans of these individuals tend to follow them across the platforms, and they promote each of their other platforms on the platform that you're on at the moment.
Now, I've used an example of to people who are outside the social media space that in fact think of each one as a country, but unlike the YouTube, the Facebook example of how big that country called Facebook is, that each country in this case here, they're all human beings, they all speak a language, but they speak a different language. So for you to play in that space as a user and as a marketer and perhaps as an influencer, you need to know that language. I mean, does that hold true for you?
And that's very true. And the really big stars in each of the platforms tend to understand that as well. They actually have teams that manage their social media presence. So they'll tailor the message for each of those platforms. And they'll make sure that what works on Twitter is not necessarily what works on Instagram, so they'll create a different message. So Twitter will have more explanation or more text, whereas Instagram will have more visual emphasis, for example. And TikTok will have more of a video emphasis, or YouTube, for that matter, will have more of a video emphasis. And that is well understood. But there are a lot of people who simply, so you've come across it yourself on Twitter, the individual who every second post is a link to an Instagram post. What they've done is simply automatically linked Instagram to Twitter, so that every time they post on Instagram, it posts that link to Twitter as well. And that's just poor use of the platform. It's also mindless use of the platform, but it's very common.
Okay, so let's conclude that by asking you, from high brow position, what is it that we should then finally take out from all of this?
I think the big takeout is that marketers shouldn't just stick to the platform they know, or if they want to stick to the platform that they know and that they use, then it's incumbent on them to use more platforms. So they need to get stuck into each of the platforms and use them actively. It doesn't matter if they don't like it. That's not actually their prerogative. They are a marketer. They are there to amplify the brand message, not to amplify their own preferences in terms of social media. And I think that's the biggest drawback for many brands, is when their brand custodian on social media has got those kinds of prejudices. This isn't an environment for platform prejudice It's an environment for learning what works best on each platform, and you only do that by using the platform. So get out there and use the platform.
And Arthur, just to wrap up then, this concept of an owner of an account on any of these social media platforms, in fact, being an owner of digital real estate and therefore for sale, as in influencers, how what came through out of that in terms of where influencers are, micro and major, and where's it going to?
We asked that question if the brand paid influencers. And it was very interesting to see that the proportion actually dropped significantly from last year. So last year, more than a third of brands, 35%, were using paid influencers. This year, that dropped to 29%. So you can see the concept is falling out of favor. But then we also asked them, do you know who the most influential people are in your social media communities? And that also dropped. So last year, that was 63%, which is very high. It dropped to 58%. So it seems like a small drop, but it's almost exactly the same drop in percentage terms as those who are using paid social media influencers. But probably the most interesting set of stats there is that the percentage that use paid influencers is exactly half of the percentage of those who know who their most influential people are. So by knowing who your most influential people are, you can engage with them without having to pay them for trying to get your brand amplified.
Okay, I know the hashtag for this is what? Hashtag social SA 2020. But where can people find all this information with a lot more detail if they choose to?
If they go to the World Wide Works website, the first story on the site, worldwideworks.com, and works is with an X, W-O-R-X, worldwideworks.com. The first story is the headline findings of the research. If they click on that link and they go to the bottom of the story, there's a form they can fill in to download the report for free.
Okay, well, man of influence, Arthur Goldstuck, thanks for your time. Most appreciated, and thanks for joining me here on Marketing Wars. Doug Place representing Nandos, not just in Africa, but Middle East and South Asia. Welcome to what we call Marketing Wars here on the Ashraf Gardner show. Good chatting to you. It's a bit of a war, isn't it, to try and get market share in a very now hostile territory. Tell me about that very quickly. First of all, about how Nandos, let's say in South Africa specifically, has responded to restrictions, and how you want to still keep your brand alive and do business.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, thanks so much for having me, and I'm so glad that you're back talking marketing. I hope you keep doing it. It's a valuable and important service to the marketing community, and indeed the South African public community as well. Yeah, so lockdown has been an interesting thing to see. I have line of sight about 13 different Nandos countries around the world, and South Africa was by far the most onerous lockdown. It happened the quickest, and it was the most severe. In most of the other parts of Nando's world, they could still trade things like delivery. They could still have very small parts of the business to keep open. Whereas under lockdown level 5 and level 4. There was very little we could actually do. But we're a brand beyond just our service, which is the world's best flame grilled peri peri chicken. And when we announced the lockdown, we had an overwhelming public request to listen, please keep talking to us. Be with us during this time. So even though we couldn't operate as a business, we made a decision, and it wasn't a hard decision to make by any means, to continue talking to and with South Africans, and that's something we've done as a brand for 30-odd years. So we did a couple of things which were quite interesting. We introduced, we called it a COVID dictionary, but we couldn't call it that because you get restrictions on social media with anything COVID. So we called it Lockdown Lingo instead. Which was basically us participating with a broader conversation which many South Africans were having at various degrees of the lockdown around how they respond to presidential updates, or the neighbor that rats on the other neighbor because they walking their dog outside of a curfew, and so we had a whole heap of fun basically doing what we've always done, which is playing back to South Africans what we see South Africans doing on a daily basis.
Okay.
So, and there was a really good response to that.
Well, I want to run through some of the things you've done in the response, but you sort of partially answered the first point, which was like, why would you want to push your brand out in that first few weeks of April when you and I know there was absolutely nothing going on? So you're suggesting that the people, was it the people where they were calling you? Did you do market research on it? How did you know that enough people wanted Nandos to continue talking so that you continue talking?
Well, what happened was we made a little video, actually, just mostly for our Nandokas, our staff, which was to mark the occasion for the first time since 1987 that our grills went cold. And this video then spilled externally. It found its way to WhatsApp groups. It found its way to LinkedIn. Public disappointment was, listen, lockdown's already really hard. Now we have to deal with lockdown without Nandos. That's even worse. And so we saw a lot of commentary in around that particular piece of communication that said, listen, we know you can't serve us. The grills are cold, but don't you go away. And so it was us, I suppose, responding to that in the moment. I mean, we've said this before when we've chatted, we spend more time listening than we do talking. And I think, all marketing people should do that. And you can see in a number of spaces that we didn't want to look back on this time and people say, well, where were you in our darkest moment? And we can say, we were laughing with the things you were laughing about. We were sad about the things that you were sad about. And we want to help in material ways because we're a proud South African brand. We love Mzansi, and we want, the suffering that's associated with this particular, virus and condition to be minimized in so much as we possibly can do so. So, a simple thing like Lockdown Lingo was the first of many things we got. And
if I get it right, the first one of your Lockdown Lingo was Rama Punctual, right?
Exactly.
How tell me like so you have Nandos and you have your agency. Who's the agency you worked with, and how did you decide? Because you're actually playing with the president, actually. Yes, he has been late for a couple of those early meetings, and that's changed somewhat. Give me an insight into the conversations you had before you said yes, okay to go.
On that one in particular, like, it's not the first time we've spoken about presidents in ads. And, we're a big fan of Cyril, like most of South Africa has been. And again, a lot of the creativity doesn't come from us. It's us responding to conversations which we see and are a part of all of the time. And, the whole country holds its breath waiting for the next announcement. And there's only so long you can hold your breath for. And if it goes, 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late is different to, certainly those initial announcements, which ran, an hour or two late. And what we're looking for, and I'll get to the agency network in a section, is where's the intersection of where does every South African have, where's their consensus, where's their unity? And every South African was like, okay, seriously, if it's 7 o'clock, then it means 7 o'clock, not necessarily 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So Rama Punctual was a way of us summarizing how everyone was feeling during those updates and those times. So it's not in any way meant to be shady or divisive or controversial or upsetting. And that certainly wasn't the reaction we got. It was overwhelmingly positive, which is what most good Nandos ads do, is they make people go, yeah, ain't that so? Like, you're right. You've said what I've been thinking and feeling all along.
I think that's your strength, and understanding that insight where you are, you're the echo chamber really of what we're all thinking. I'm not going to run through all of them, but I'm going to get through to which I think is your last one, which is a fellow South, which again would be the president talking, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So there was. I think a lot of South Africans, and us included, when we were told the various milestones of lockdown, that, come 17th of April, we'll be reunited. And then that was extended to the 1st of May. And then the 1st of May was, extended into these various lockdown levels and all the, the complexities associated with that. So whilst we were waiting and preparing to reopen at least a substantial portion of our business, and a lot of South Africans were waiting, to re-greet us on the other side. When it was extended, there was a collective, not yet. So that's where the R came from. The fellow South Africans was, again, a meme which we saw all the time on the internet, which is, the opening lines of the presidential addresses were fellow South Africans, and the people had a lot of fun with that. So it was us also acknowledging the humor of people who've made a gag similar to ours.
Okay, and do I take it now it's stopped? or is it likely to continue because lockdown in some form has continued?
Well, we pivoted around a few things. So when we were allowed to trade delivery only, now I understand delivery is the smallest part of our business and the least profitable part of our business, and many South Africans just don't have the access or the facility, to be able to purchase it. So even though we could have opened, us and many other restaurant brands couldn't do that either. So we decided not to. But we saw on the news like all these long queues of everyday South Africans really battling for food. And we have food in our freezers and in our various restaurants. So we decided to cook all the food that we had that we prepared for a reopening, and serve those communities. And invited our frenemies, KFC and McDonald's, who then invited their frenemies to kind of also join us because they were in a similar position that they couldn't open as well. So we then spent a couple of weeks specifically campaigning around that, which was, we're going to feed as many people as we possibly can at a time when people most need it. So Lockdown Lingo took a bit of a backseat for that. We also are thrilled with the likes of the Solidarity Fund, which the President has mentioned many times in his speeches, and so wanted to kind of get behind, raise public awareness about the great work that they're doing. And so, we then, sold vouchers online, and then whatever the voucher value is, we gave 10 times that to the Solidarity Fund. So if you've got 100 Rand Nandos voucher, we give 1,000 Rand to the Solidarity Fund. And we've raised almost 500,000 Rand just by doing that. So people can, when the stores were able to reopen, you could use the voucher you already bought, and then we, taking care of the Solidarity Fund movement, who are far better positioned than we are to provide relief efforts.
And the agency that you alluded to, is it still MNC Sarchiable? Yeah.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So it's broad networks. MNC Sarchiable and VML are the two primary ones. With these kinds of ads, we don't have the luxury of spending a week crafting a brief and 2 weeks waiting for the first revert and then refining it. The brief is in the morning and we want something out by the evening. So literally anyone who has a good idea, it can come from anywhere. So we have a WhatsApp group like everyone else does. And one day when I retire, I'll publish a book of all the ads we didn't make.
I'd love to see. I'd love to see all of those. Yeah. Okay. So it's as simple as that. Quick turnaround. So would you? I mean, I speak to you today, for example, on the 10th anniversary of the 2010 World Cup, and I have lots to say about it. And I posted. I made a video just now and a podcast as well. Now. We'd expect Nandos to say something. Has it come out already, or should I look out for just now?
It's an interesting brief. We'll definitely have a look. Again, a lot of what it comes from is we're inspired by the conversations which we hear. So if that's a real conversation we can meaningfully participate in, yeah, for sure.
Well, here's the one. I'll say it loud. I tweeted that Simpiwe Shabalala scored the first goal of the World Cup, which was the opening goal of the World Cup, and it was the goal of the World Cup. And I just wish that he delivered that goal as the final goal of the World Cup. And maybe that's your Nandos punchline about, we do service delivery, something along that line.
Yeah, Simpiwe has also got a little bit lost. He's involved with some fish business.
Okay, so we'll move away. Yeah,
just need to keep an eye. I don't want to
just very quickly. I mean, if you can, before we wrap up, give us an idea of the responses you've had in terms of numbers of views. Anything you can share around those communications. Yeah.
So, like from a brand perspective, like an engagement rate. So the degree to which people respond, measurably to online. In South Africa, it's about 1% online. Now, Nandos, we're really lucky, and we've worked really hard to get that on average to about 3 or 4%. These Lockdown Lingo things we've done, as well as the Frenemies campaign and the finger licking ain't so good anymore, campaign which we started lockdown with, have engagement rates north of 10%. So they are 3 times what is our benchmark, and they reach anywhere between sort of 1 and 3 million people within a matter of hours. So there's a real, from a marketing perspective, a media perspective, there's a real efficiency which comes as a result of staying engaged with your community, caring about the things that they care about, and sharing the burdens with them as well as the lighter moments. Which means that when we do have bigger media investments, we don't have to put as much, firepower behind it to get the message out there. Because these are ads that people want to see, they want to hear, they want to laugh, they want to smile, they want to feel, that was a bit close to the bone, because that's what we feel. And so we're going to continue doing that.
Okay, so the word frenemies sticks out. So who said it's a real marketing war? It's a bit of a friendly marketing war of sorts, right? Doug Place, great chatting to you. I'll look out for what's coming up next with Nandos. New brand surfaced on the market fairly shortly, called a short while ago, in fact, called MatchKit. The co-founder of MatchKit is somebody I know pretty well, with a whole lot of different faces. Mike Sharman, good chatting to you. Tell me about MatchKit, Mike.
Hi, Ashraf. Yes, we officially launched a week ago, and we've had some pretty... Bryan Habana is a co-founder of ours. He and I went to school together, and we are involved in a sports marketing agency called Retroactive too, and that's where a lot of the insights in the sporting space has come from. We've been working with athletes over the last 2 years, and some of them good, some of them they forget the personal branding side of things, or it's the aspect that they haven't really ever tapped into before. So sometimes they forget to mention sponsors on interviews, or they forget to name check where necessary. And the thing for athletes is that COVID-19 has really been a real playing field leveler, in the sense that so many of them, some at the height of their careers, others entering, others exiting, they've all kind of experienced the similar shutdown. And when we look at 2020, it's going to have a ripple effect in the sense that there's almost this lost generation of athletes. So if you think about those who they build their entire careers around going to the Olympics, which has now been postponed, and we're still not sure if it's actually going to go ahead. If you think about some of these school athletes and how they play at Craven Weeks and they play at Easter festivals, both in boys and girls sport, so many of them will get lost to the system because they wouldn't have the opportunity to be scouted. So MatchKit came out of the idea that even some of the Springbok heroes who returned from Japan don't even have websites. Some of them haven't registered their own name as the URL or a domain. If you search for some of them are being domain squatted, and you'll have to spend about $100,000 just to get that URL. So we said, let's create a platform that users and athletes can log in via Instagram. They can develop a personal and professional personal branding space that connects to all of their social, and it brings this fragmented ecosystem into one house. And then from there, they can showcase themselves at their professional best. They don't need to have any dev knowledge, any design knowledge, and whether they are managing themselves or they have an agent, they now have the ability to put on a most professional foot forward, and they have the ability to raise funds for a charity that they run or that they are involved in. And we've added the layer of an additional revenue stream by allowing them to create their own branded merchandise, physical merchandise such as caps, t-shirts, and hoodies, where they can add their own logos, so they can start thinking of themselves as a brand, or they can sell digital merchandise, which is voice notes to fans, videos to fans, and to create some kind of thinking around the fact that they are digital storefronts, and how can they leverage that opportunity.
And all of that under this MatchKit banner, right? Do I take it? I mean, it sounds very good, and it sounds wonderful that you want to help, but there's a business imperative around it. Okay, so where does MatchKit make its money?
So the URL is matchkit.co. You can check it out if you're an athlete or you have an athlete in mind that you'd like to send this on to. And we're a subscription business, or software as a service business. So we charge you $19.99 a month, and then you have access to this whole MatchKit world, which includes your professional kind of mobile website. You have access to the storefront, the merchandise sales, as well as the ability to raise funds for your charity. And that's effectively our model is to make money off the subscriptions. And if you compare it to the likes of Shopify, if you compare it to the likes of buying a template for a website, and the fact that you don't need a dev or a designer to help you, we believe that we suitably position for both a local and an international audience of athletes.
Okay, so the sports personality would pay, and that's fine, I understand. Would you then still require the public to log into that website, into that portal rather, to be able to make that match up, and do they do so at a cost as well?
No, the fan doesn't pay. I mean, the fan is basically visiting your site as they would a website. And then when it comes to purchasing merchandise, then the transaction occurs between the fan and the athlete, and then the athlete makes the profit off that merchandise sale. So it's effectively an e-commerce play within your athlete's page.
I noticed very early when this was launched just over a week ago, there's a whole lot of people like, and like I mean, it's like, goodness, I should have thought about this, and I'm sure you've heard that, right? So, is this being done elsewhere? No?
So what is interesting is that there's very generalist iterations of a similar idea. So we've seen that, there's Shopify, there's WordPress, there's theme businesses that you can build websites off, but the evolution of a lot of e-commerce plays is to look specifically into verticals. So from a vertical perspective, there was one or two products that were very similar, but they didn't manage to get the traction required. And there were elements within that structure that didn't work to a very niche specific athlete solve and requirement. On the converse of that, in the vertical space, if you look at a product such as Bento Box is a mobile builder just for restaurants and small food businesses. They've just raised $16 million in a Series B round in the US. So if you look at the verticals in food and drink and entertainment, there are things like that exist. But for us, we feel that we've tapped into the niche and the insight of an idea that was previously covered under a very generalist brand. If you think about LinkedIn, it's great for all professionals. Those may include professional sports and athletes, but there's nothing that gives you athletes in isolation. And we're not here to compete with social media. We're here to help take that fragmented world and bring it all together so that I, as a fan, I can go and search for Bryan Habana and his match kit will give me all of his links in one space. It's the same with so many individuals don't think about themselves as a personal brand in the athlete space. So they haven't necessarily registered the same domain name or handle across all their channels. Sometimes there could be a name and a number that represents their sporting number. And it's so few, it's maybe the 1%ers of athletes that really started at the bottom. They registered domains. They registered the same handle. In the entered world, we're making all of those fragmented parts come together in a holistic whole.
Are you not, in essence, doing the job of player agents? Are you a player agent?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think we are a supplementary tech solution to the agents, and now they can showcase their athletes better. So whether athletes have an agent or they don't, I think this is a tool that can be used by the diverse audience. So for the agents and the benefits for them, they'll be able to now have reporting to showcase how many people have viewed their athletes' pages. We've got our own match kit analytics, so we can see how popular and engaged with that specific pages. That can then go back to the brands to show them the upside that they've had by having an athlete on MatchKit. So it's actually a tool that enhances the agent's job, and it makes all of their clients much more marketable. And in an age of reduced budgets and marketing cuts that are being experienced off the back of COVID-19, the fact that sport itself has experienced a $61 billion loss in projected income earnings off the back of COVID-19 and various lockdown scenarios, we need to be smart about the way in which properties can be maximized, and athletes are the ultimate commercialized property, and if they're not playing, how are they able to maximize their commercial endeavors? And that's what we strive from a match.
Well, based on your insights then, how big a problem is this that, and I'm not talking about the elite athletes, that there are many sort of middle tier athletes around the world, and in this case South Africa, who for whatever reason do not fully leverage the fact that they are a brand, that they are a property, that they actually they are real estate that can be rented out. Okay, how big a problem is that?
Well, we don't know the full extent to the damage that will be caused and the decimation that will occur on certain of the middle to lower leagues, but our target market is really your athlete who is a journeyman and woman, and they're the person who is going to retire at 30 and still definitely need to get a job post their sporting career. So the more opportunity they can think about becoming a brand, the greater the longevity of their career, the greater the opportunity to give themselves a professional or public speaking career or any kind of brand support. If you look at guys like Bryan Habana, like Lucas Radebe, they've really managed to maximize time after retirement. Lucas is a perfect example. Lucas is now more relevant than ever. He's on big discovery campaigns. We worked with him on a campaign for Javits Properties a couple of years ago. And he's a very likable individual who's built a professional personal brand. He's an absolute god and legend at Ellen Road still. He has his own box and his own statues and all kinds of things. But he's understood the importance of nurturing those relationships and continuing them after his career. The same with Bryan. He's been with Adidas for like 18 to 20 years. He's been with Land Rover since he was playing junior rugby for the Lions. And I think that it's the understanding of a mixture of network and relationships, and also cultivating the two, that will ultimately put you in good stead. So we'll be providing content on a regular basis, sharing these insights with our athletes, showing them what the best practice elements are to do, bringing our thinking of our marketing hat into the mix, as well as the player and athlete insights that Bryan picked up during his playing days and what worked best for the brands that he engaged with that leveraged him and maximized his commerciality throughout.
So I think you gave two very good examples, Lucas Radebe and Bryan Habana, World Cup winner Bryan Habana, that is, of course, right? But having said that, your pitch really, if I understand what you said, is actually not to them. These are the elite athletes at the top of their game. One just thinks about Cristiano Ronaldo now. You're not going to ask him, or he's not going to be interested in even putting his portfolio on your site. He's got his own massive team, right? So yes, the journeyman sportsmen or sportswomen are the bigger pool, but they're also less in terms of the revenue they're likely to earn, isn't it?
Well, what's interesting is if you think about those individuals, if you think about a cricketer who's done really well in his career, but he's never played at the absolute 1% throughout his entire career, someone like Henry Davids. So if Henry Davids had a match kit, he's getting good provincial representation, he's a regular in the team, he's making his monthly fee. For him to have a match kit and to be able to go to the Claremont Kia and showcase the professionalism of his personal brand, for him to have a car sponsorship and taking that cost of whatever a car repayment would be on his monthly budget, and putting that into his bottom line of his personal income or his personal budget, that's going to make a huge difference on his life. So that's the kind of soul that will make the impact. The guys like the Ronaldos and the Messis and the Lewis Hamiltons and Serenas, exactly to your point, they've got an entire team, they have social media teams, they have people handling them. So for this product, especially for those journeymen and women, I think this can make the most impact, because now it's making them think about the value that they can add to their lives. It's making them think about what are they doing with their dollars and cents, and where they're investing that money into their future. Something that we'd like to incorporate in the next 6 to 12 months is some kind of education package. So the insight from Get Smarter is that so many athletes that sign up, especially from South Africa, they end up going and studying a finance management degree, like a basics, a 101 thereof, as well as a property management degree, because so many of these athletes, when they sit on lump sums of cash during their career, friends and family and financial advisors will suggest them, why don't you put money into property? Because then you're building an asset, you're building your wealth in new ways. And just that insight alone, that allows us to consider what kind of product or portfolio of basket of goods could we potentially offer athletes as value adds and provide them with discounts or their own personalized insurance product. So there really is a lot of legs and opportunity for something such as matchkit.com.
Do I then see down the line that, in fact, if a company, if a car dealer spots, you mentioned Henry David, spots Henry David's as part of matchkit and approaches Henry directly or through his agent, that in fact matchkit itself will make a commission agreed upon in advance on that deal as well?
Well, for us, we don't really want to have any part of that action, because we feel that that's the part that's going to be attractive to the individual or to the agent. Like we've said, here's an inbox that we've built into your match kit, but whatever happens with that deal, whatever happens behind closed doors in those conversations, we're not interested in making any upside on that, because for us, ours is a volume play, so subscription comes into it very heavily. But if you've used our tool to enable yourself to do a car deal, any kind of sponsor deal, anything like that, then that's something that you should fully maximize, whether it's for you or your agent to deal with that. So for me, for right now, it's a hard no. But you never know what happens in the future. But for right now, we want to just try and provide as much upside to the athlete and their agent as possible, so that we're not greedy in this process, and that this is a new transparent way of doing deals for athletes in the market.
Give us some ideas so far. I mean, what, 1 week and a bit into the launch? What has happened? What has been response? Give me some numbers. Is it biting?
Well, the most exciting thing is the mixture of talent pool. So we have Sene, who's the vice captain of the Irish women's rugby team. We have Tammy Beaumont, who is England cricketer, and she was one of the highest run scorers at the last Women's World Cup. She was a Wisden Cricket Player of the Year last year. We have Thembi Kgatlana, who plays for Banyana and Benfica. She's using the platform. She's really loving it. And she was a CAF Player of the Year and a CAF Goal Scorer of the Year. We also have Henry Schoeman, who's a bronze medalist from the Olympics. He's an African Games gold winner. He's a triathlete champion. We have Siobela Senatla, obviously, with his prowess from a blitzbox perspective and his intentions to make it into the Springboks 15 on a more regular basis. We have various cyclists and epic winners on the mountain bike, both men and women. So that's been the most encouraging sign, is that as those numbers continue to tick over, every day there's new sign-ups. There's footballers, cricketers, rugby players, niche sports men and women. And of the handful of athletes that have signed up in the last week alone, we now reach about 1.7 million fans across Instagram alone. So for me, it's quite an encouraging piece of sign-up. The fact that we have the ability to counter any kind of negativity or perceived criticism of the platform, that's been the best thing, is that agents and individuals alike have asked us questions. We've been able to handle those, similar to this kind of interview, and they've been happy to sign up off the back of that. And we're excited to grow. There's some really interesting developments in the US from a college ball perspective. I'm sure you've been watching The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the rest of the Chicago Bulls, as most of the world has. And there's a new development in the US called the Fair Pay to Play Act. In the past, there's been so many of these athletes that are represented by the NCAA who've never been able to be paid for their likeness or their image. And so many of these college games sell out larger stadiums than we have in South Africa for our national teams. And that for me is encouraging, because now so many of these young athletes who will only reach the heights of their careers playing at college, some of them will never go on to the NBA or the NFL or whatever other discipline. I think it's only 2% of those athletes go on to the actual NBA and NFL. And if we can tap into some of those, we will have some great success. And that's the most encouraging signs for me, is looking at the evolution of the game, not just for your tier 1 and your 1%er athletes, but also for your mainstream sports, your college sports, your university stars here that are playing for the varsity sports divisions. And that for me is an exciting development, is that we can basically implement a tool that can make people more money. I think that's an exciting thing for us.
You mentioned some degrees of negativity. What's been the most repeated negative question that's emerged?
I think to your point earlier was that are we cutting the agents out? I think that's a strong negativity. I think when you start using those phrases, then it almost feels like you're disrupting for the sake of a revolution, and you're changing a certain key point that benefited from that. So that's probably the biggest negativity. And then off the back of that, exactly like I answered to you earlier, is that it's by no means an opportunity to cut agents out, but it's an opportunity for them to enhance their relationships with their clients and their talent, and for the pie to be made bigger in terms of commercial upside. So that's probably negativity is a strong word, more of a constructive criticism.
Okay. What sort of numbers do you need to make this a viable project?
For me, like we eating one. It's like that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. And I think for us, there's a lot of these guys like the Seth Godins of the world and the Tim Ferriss of the world, and they talk about your 1,000 true fans. And for us, I think once we've broken through that first 1,000 athlete barrier, I think for us, that's when this starts to become really exciting. And 1,000 isn't that many if you think about the scalability of social networks, the scalability of platforms. Once we make 1,000 signups, then we have the ability to really have a cross-sectional view of what success has looked like, from the insights, from the analytics, from the features that the athletes are using the most. I mean, this weekend alone, a whole bunch of esports enthusiasts, we have one or two of them on the platform already, such as Julia Robson. She's from Cape Town, and she's a professional gamer. And she leveraged MatchKit to raise about 27,000 Rand for Bryan Habana's foundation using MatchKit as the technology and the tool. I mean, there's so many encouraging signs. And for me, I'm not a business plan fan. I'm a person who, when we have an idea and we've done enough research and we've spent some time crafting what it is that we go to market with, that you then listen very intently and very closely to what your early adopters are feeding you information with, and you then get a better sense of the features that they actually need and want versus those that were a little bit more vanity based on your own insights and your own ideas. So for me, that's what I'm excited about, how people will use it and how it will add value in different
let me
levels.
come full circle. I mean, not just being a business guy and somebody who's a marketer yourself and who understands the digital space, but also clearly a sports fan, right? And then you've got Bryan Habana as a partner. So your thoughts in terms of what can we learn from Bryan Habana, not just the World Cup winning rugby player named after Brian Robson, so he should well have been a Man United player, but that didn't happen. But what can we learn, not so much about his ability as a player, but about the decisions he's made in terms of commercializing his property that you'd like to share with us now?
Yeah, I think that what he's done, he's been a consummate professional. And I think that if you think about brands and marketing, in this day and age, people are so fickle. People will jump from one brand to the next on a slightly higher paycheck. People will move and they'll shake and they'll schmooze and they'll be wine and dined in order to get that next big contract. But Bryan understood that he had a certain lifespan on his career, and he maximized his partnerships and relationships with those people that mattered the most to him, the people that backed him from before he was a Springbok, from when he was a skinny scrum half, when we were at school together. You know, he had a very specific, he had an astute understanding of the types of relationships he wanted to be in. And I think that's why partners like Adidas have been with him for so long, because he's supported them similarly to the way in which Land Rover, massive ambassador, and it's the same. That was playing in his playing days. He was there driving his Land Rover, sharing the love, and he was almost that first generation of digital natives or social media natives that really understood that he had the opportunity to build an audience, to be authentic in the communication with that audience, and then to put his brands into his lifestyle that would be a very natural fit and non-forced value and faith within your relationships with your fans. And I think that's the thing that so many athletes forget, is that there's almost like this non-written comments. And if you try and dupe your fans by pushing product into their faces and trying to be subtle with your product placement, I think that can backfire on both sides, because you could lose audience and you can lose the value that the brand has invested in you to engage with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights, Mike Sharman, and certainly about MatchKit and certainly about Bryan Habana as well. I think from your side, it sounds like a great concept. I will certainly follow it very, very closely as someone who really appreciates sport. Simple to say that for MatchKit, it's match day for you guys. Lots of things happening right now around the world, and certainly in South Africa, around changing insights, changing patterns in terms of the way we do business. And it's not just because of COVID-19. I think there's a whole lot more. But let's find out more from Ashish Williams, who's the CEO of MediaCom SA. And Ashish, in fact, presented issues around trends and insights that I thought particularly interesting. So I thought I'd get hold of him. Ashish, thanks for your time. Most appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell me,
and thanks for having me.
Maybe just as a starting point, MediaCom SA, what is it that you do?
So MediaCom South Africa, we handle the client portfolios for multinational companies like Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Shell, Dell, who are our global clients. We handle their media investments into into platforms like television to digital, and we advise, consult, and implement the airing, the campaigns of the multinational communications
So you
platforms.
tell them where to spend their money as well.
Yes, kind of. We tell them where to spend their money to have the maximum return on investment.
Okay. So with that in mind, you presented last week at the IAB Cantor webinar, and I thought, let me pick your brain on that. So perhaps as a starting point, what is it in broad terms that you did present on?
So on the IAB Cantor webinar, the theme was pretty much around the new normal, and how, as a consumers, myself and you, our behaviors have changed, and then to find out what should the marketers do during this time, because it's a tough spot to be in, whether you should be advertising or and if you are going to advertise, how you should advertise, because the new normal is very different than the normal we know about it. So that was I was just sharing my my insights and knowledge around the platforms which the advertisers needs to.
Okay, perhaps that's what we need to do a deep dive into. So should marketers advertise, and where should they advertise?
Yeah, so again, depends on the advertiser. So my recommendation is, yes, they should be advertising, because we have seen time and again, and different researchers globally, when the companies advertised this period. So when the new normal hits, the chances for them to come back and regain the market share is far higher than the companies who stop advertising and restarted when the new normal happens. So my definite recommendation is that they should be advertising, because
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wonder if you can just repeat that last bit, that yes, they definitely should be advertising.
Yeah. The point which I'm trying to say is that when you look into the global crisis, probably I'm repeating myself here, but all of the global crises which have happened before, including the financial crisis of 2008 or previous crisis, the brands which have continued to advertise, maybe not at the same proportion, but yes, they have been constantly having a dialogue or conversation or engagement with their consumers. When you are over with your financial crisis, the chances of regaining the market share, the chances of going back to the normal is far higher for the brands which are advertising than the brands which stops advertising.
But having said that, how do you convince a marketer with some money? How does the marketer convince the CEO to spend money in a shrinking market, amongst consumers who are actually not consuming? They're not spending, certainly not now.
Yeah, see, if you look at the advertising, right, the basic premise has always been around pull and push. So if you look at the sales organization, they are probably putting more of push kind of a thing. And yes, at this time you cannot push your product, because of the fact that we are in a very different situations which we are staying in. And advertising has always been conceptualized to create the pull or to create the demand. And this is the perfect time for you to be engaging with your consumers, because this is the time when the clutter is not there. This is the time when if you look at the media consumption, they have gone through the roof, right, on digital or on television. So this is the time, if you spend, let's say, 100 Rand, it used to give you an ROI of 110 earlier. Now it will probably give you 150, 1.5 times the ROI. So it becomes far more performance driven. So this is the time, or probably this is the time where they have all been waiting for, including us, when the consumer is actually spending time on media. Because what we have been seeing over the period of time, the consumption of media has been going down or proliferation happening. So in digital, there are like thousands of websites. In television, there are so many channels which have consumers have moved into. So my suggestion is this is the time you have been waiting for. I know it's you are in a rock and a hard place, but I guess you don't need to spend like big campaigns or big money, but you can be smart about your choices to continue to have conversation with your consumer.
Okay, so beyond that, I mean, share maybe key points that emerged from your presentation.
Yeah. So you do three types of communication, right? Not three types of, or I mean, in terms of three pillars of communications which are there. So in your communication strategy, either you want to reach your consumers, or you want to make your brand communication or brand relevant to the consumers, or you want to have a specific reaction from your consumer. So we break such as reach, relevance. When the situation is all good, and everybody's fighting for their share of a voice, then you go with the reach platform. But this is not the time to go into reach platform, I would suggest, but to go for relevancy and more for reaction. So as I said, like the advertisers are facing the cash crunch. They don't have this kind of volume of money to invest in media. And they can be very smart about the choices, whether to look at specific reaction. So they might look at specific e-commerce, social commerce, SEO communication with their consumers rather than to use a television big burst campaign. So they need to decide between reach, relevance, and reaction, what kind of communication they need to follow.
And in terms of the where, you use the word digital many times, and maybe if we had this conversation 10 years ago, it probably would have been mentioned just once. I mean, so again, where should they be spending once the decision has been made? Does it have to move to digital? Is that just a cute word that we all talk about, or there's traditional marketing spend that has got to be maintained and retained?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I know like sometimes we blame our profession. We become so technical rather and answer the question in a very technical way. So here the point is, if you are an advertiser and you have done something beautiful in these times, right? You have stood up for something during the COVID rather than talking about stay safe and stay home. If you like, for example, one of our advertisers, or clients like Shell, they stood out and they did an outdoor campaign, which was around, we will give free snacks to all of the retail outlets, right, of Shell. So that's something which they stood for and communicated. So brand could relate to the communication. So yes, you need those outdoor platforms, and it really matters from a community side of things, because if you look at the Shell outlets, it's more community driven, right, and that area driven. So that's the right strategy. And they just wanted to have a communication and engagement with the consumer. However, if you want to be more focused on the sales side of things, let's say certain products, right, I would go around communicating it on Google search. I would go around communicating it on a website of the advantages of the product, and for consumers to take certain action to go and buy through e-commerce rather than going physically into the store and doing the shopping. So which kind of exposes them to the risk. So yeah, it depends on the marketing objectives. And then in a nutshell, that's what we do, right? We consult and we advertise. We consult our advertisers and tell them what kind of communication strategy they should have.
Now, and I'm quoting you directly, where you say, despite some brands' reluctance to say or do something insensitive, people actually want to hear from their favorite brands. Now, how do you know that people want to hear from their favorite brands even when they're not consuming those brands right now?
Yeah, so I mean, we work very closely with Kantar. We are part of the same group. So if you look at the Kantar barometers, where we have done the research among the consumers, and we have asked like 6 different questions. So right from the fact that should the brand be talking about attack the crisis and demonstrate, that it can be fought, to the level of be optimistic and think in an unconventional way. Uh, the one attribute which really stood out was around be practical and realistic and help consumers their everyday life. So it actually gained 28% recall or voting, let me call it, in terms of favorites. So they want a very practical communication because they are consuming media. And the research from Global Web Index says that in South Africa, more than 35% of people will switch to the brands who are engaging with them in media. So you can see that there is a correlation up there. So they want to listen, plus they don't want to listen, but also want to switch to the brands who is talking to them during this crisis.
You speak about a principled approach to connections. Explain what does that mean?
Principal approach. Is it something when I said to you during the IIB Kanta time?
Well, in terms of your presentation that you'd made, you spoke about
yes,
that brands need to have a principled approach to connections, right? Yeah.
So that's right. So we said there are 7 points which you should be looking at, right? So one is the advertisers who are keen to go back and start advertising. It's very important that we have seen the television ratings between prime time and daytime. It's all the same now. It's like going through the roof, be it on the digital. But we still need to understand the innate consumer consumption is it is not about number of people have gone back to television. It's the same people, but their time spent on that platform has really gone up. So if you take one advertising or one particular TV ad and try to run for next 3 months, maybe hundreds of times of frequency, it's not going. It becomes like a blind spot. So you have to make sure that you are using the right technology, like a dynamic creative optimizations and things like that, where you are able to rotate your content quite fluently. And that's what we call it as we need to know the new priorities on digital utility e-commerce. We talked about the point, the second point, which was around make sure that in your portfolio of brands which you have, which are more relevant. So make sure that you're putting your money where your mouth is. So the brands which are more relevant during these times, start investing on those, and you can deprioritize the ones which are not very relevant during this time. So that's kind of a portfolio mix. We talked about the third principle, which is about mix and secure your ad stock. So what essentially it means is that what is today will not be something which will continue for next 3 months or 9 months. So make sure that you have a provision of changing your communication strategies for month on month rather than a 6 months or a 9 months, because we are forced to make our behaviors change. So, for example, the outdoor is coming back, the radio is coming back. So you can't discard that. Okay, we'll not use the radio and outdoor for next 6 months. So have a provision for that. My next point was around health and wellness, which we have seen. If you look at the Google search trend, that is something which is becoming more important during from pre-COVID to the COVID times, and now we are going into the new normal. To how can you connect the wellness to your communication strategies or communication to your consumers? So start working around that one, because consumers are looking for health and safety side of things. So very important, and most important is having a positive tonality in order to promote the enthusiasm of consumers returning to new normal and freedom. So being positive. And most of all, the most important point was around I know our field is becoming more and more complex, but also at the same time, we are becoming more resourceful. So look at those social analytics platforms and content analysis tool. There's a plethora of insights which you'll start getting because there's no one size fits all. So fits all. For example, from a 15 to 24 age group is not behaving the same way as a 35 plus age group. So try to segment your consumers, try to understand their insights to know what they are going to. I gave one example around IKEA in my presentation, where beautifully they are able to create a short series on YouTube and also they put it on TV about how to create dens and forts, and when you are at home, right? So we all know that with the kids at home, it's quite a jarring task to manage the kids as well as the office, work from home. So multitasking is there. So very, very, I think, a touchy communication where IKEA was able to talk to the parents and tell them that you can use these tasks for the kids to make them involved.
Okay,
so these are the principles which I
so much to learn from. Is there one final point that you think this audience needs to know? We are talking under the theme of marketing wars, yeah?
So one final thing, this is the best time for the advertisers to win the war, because it's not filled with a lot of clutter. So make best use of it, communicate to the consumers who are ready to listen. Don't waste this opportunity.
And what for you then, for a marketer, what would be winning the war right now?
My winning the war would be my reaction from the consumers. So all of our life and our strategies have always been about, can we win more reaction, more engagement from the consumers? And if we are able to see the engagement of consumer with our brands and it goes up, that's for me is winning.
Okay, well there you are. Let's leave it at that. Thank you for your time.